Hi, Jessi.
Hello, I'm so sorry. Oh my
It's
goodness, I'm
okay.
so sorry. I had it in my mind that it was 8:30 and my children were going to bed, so I apologize.
No worries, no problem. We understand. Thank you for being here.
Um, Thank you, and I hope that can we still go ahead with it, even if we get
Yeah,
a cameo from my son, who is gonna tell us good night.
yeah, absolutely. Hi.
Say hi. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.
They're going for third generation. If I'm a second gener, then we're going for third generation right there.
All right. Well, I think we're going to actually touch on that question, so I'm
Awesome.
excited.
Wonderful.
Thank you for being here, Jessi, and to everyone who's watching, thank you for being here. So COLAGE is the only national organization for people with one or more LGBTQ plus parent or caregiver, and we provide programming to folks across the country and even some international people year round. And my name is Angel Martin. I'm the National Program Director for COLAGE. I use they, them pronouns. And I grew up in collage programming and Queerspawn myself. I have a lesbian mom. Um, and I will read Jessi's actual bio. But Jessi, if you just want to introduce yourself, name, pronouns, what makes you a collager, that would be awesome.
Sure. So, my name is Jessi Hempel. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a collager. Goodness, I'm a queer spawn. My father is gay and came out when I was, goodness, 20, 21. But I beat him out of the closet because I came out when I was 19 years old. And around that time, I also discovered collage, and it was a huge force for good in my life. So yeah, that's the short of it. There's a very long story, but that's the shorter version of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure people can hear more about the long story in your book, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. Um, so Jessi is the author of The Family Outing, which is some of what we'll be talking about tonight. We'll also just be talking about being queer spawn, being second gen. But Jessi Hempel is the host of the award-winning podcast Hello Monday and a senior editor at large at LinkedIn. For nearly 2 decades, she has been writing and editing features and cover stories for magazines including Wired, Fortune, and Time about work, life, and meaning in the contemporary age. She has appeared on CNN, PBS, MSNBC, and CNBC addressing the culture and business of technology. Hempel is a graduate of Brown University and received a master's in journalism from UC Berkeley, and she lives in Brooklyn with her wife and children, who you all just saw.
Yeah, I feel like they make too many cameos in my video appearances these days.
That's awesome. I'm glad we could meet them. Um, so Jessi, I guess we're gonna start this conversation by talking about your book, The Family Outing. And if you could just give like a synopsis for our audience about what's it about.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I actually have it right here. And no, I wasn't like coveting it just right here. It happens to actually be on my desk. But this is a memoir that I wrote about. So to take it back a step, I'm the oldest of three kids, Angel, and was born in, New England in the like last quarter of the 20th century, at a moment when my family aspired to look exactly like those Olin Mills photographs, right? Like with the like mom and dad
Oh
each
yeah.
in really like suave sweaters and the like adorably clad children. And like we nailed it. We looked exactly like that, right? Except that we didn't feel all that great inside, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we like we hit the right notes, but it never felt authentic for any of
Yeah.
us. And much later, we grew up in this family that I would say is a closeted family, and much later, like first I came out of the closet, and then, and if it's okay, I'll just actually tell you the story, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I am like 19 years old. I go to Brown University. I am a closeted gay teenager, but I quickly land in a place at Brown University, a very liberal place where there are lots of different iterations of what it might mean to be queer. And I am able to find many role models, and I kind of come out to myself. So then I like scrape up the gumption to tell my parents, and we all get into the car to drive home from my freshman year of college. And by the way, this isn't even a unique story, because whenever I tell this story, like half the audience is like, oh yeah, I came out to my parents in a car too, which, you know, I don't know what it is about cars, but so we're driving home from Providence, Rhode Island to my home in Massachusetts. And I tell my mom, I'm like, I think that maybe it could be, I could be gay, I'm like, okay. And I take a deep breath and I wait, and my mom starts crying.
Mm.
And she's like, well, I'm pretty sure your cousin's gay because he's very emotional. And my cousin was 11 years old at the time. And I was like, okay, mom. He did turn out to be gay, but we didn't know it. Right? It wasn't because he was emotional, right?
Yeah.
But then she said the right thing. She said, I love you so much, and we're going to figure this out, and it's going to be fine. My father says nothing. He just keeps on staring straight ahead with his hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. He's like, nothing. So the next morning, he like wanders into the kitchen while I'm eating my breakfast. And he pours himself a bowl of grape nuts, which is a god-awful cereal that he used to eat every morning. I swear it looks like hamster food. And he's like sitting there eating, and he's like, I thought I was gay once too.
Mm.
That's so interesting, Dad. What did you do? And he said, oh, I married your mom. And I'm like, what? And he said, oh, you make choices in life, and I married your mom.
Mm.
And then he just wanders out of the house. And I'm standing there in the kitchen, and it's this huge moment for me, both because I kind of put it together that, gosh, Dad's gay, but also because, I don't know, Angel, gay or straight, I imagine there are these moments in our adolescence where we realize for the first time that our parents are more than our parents, that they have all these identities beyond just being our parents, and it's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So that's sort of when I figured out my dad was gay, but it took a lot more years before he figured out that he was gay.
Mm.
So 3 years later, my sister was in college, and she was home from college, and she was IMing with her boyfriend on the computer, the family computer, and up in the chat box popped a name she didn't recognize, and it turned out to be somebody that my father was chatting with online.
Mm.
And she quickly put it together, and she confronted him. And we like to joke in our family that Dad didn't come out of the closet. He was kicked out of the closet, like kicked out of the closet, right?
Yeah.
And then in very short succession, right? Like my dad comes out as gay. My sister comes out as bisexual. My brother comes out as transgender. He wants to use he, him pronouns, and, comes to us and says, like, this is who I am. And through this entire experience, my mother comes to terms with a series of events that happened in her childhood, a series of violence events, and comes out as a survivor.
Mm.
So that is like the full coming out of the Hempel family.
Wow.
It was a brutal few years, very, very brutal few years.
Yeah.
And it's where it is not where the story begins. Actually, it's like straight in the middle of the book, but is impetus for the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is quite a chain of events, and definitely deserves a book to be written about it. So I'm glad that you have put that out into the world.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess one of my questions, like about what you just said and about your book, is how did all of your relationships change with each other after all of these coming outs? Like, was it different in between you coming out and before everyone else came out, or did it shift again when other people came out in your family?
That's sort of what the whole book ends up being about, right? Because they changed a lot in unexpected ways, and so to like really understand it, you kind of have to fast forward like 20 years, right? So like we all come out, that all happens, right? And like before we came out, I would not classify us as a close family. In fact, we mostly didn't get along with each other. Our relationship was super, super tough.
Yeah.
And then we did come out. Life goes on. It's March of 2020. It is the beginning of the pandemic. Where were you at the beginning of the pandemic? Were you here?
I was in LA. I lived
You
in
were in
LA.
LA?
Yeah.
Um, so, I feel like no matter where you were, it was sort of a singular moment, March of 2020, and it had a lot to do with the immediacy of like the micro environment in which you found yourself.
Yeah.
My family was living in Brooklyn, and I knew a bunch of things about myself. I was a financial writer, a tech writer. I was a new parent. My wife and I had this like itty bitty baby at home. No, he wasn't even itty bitty. He was 15 months old.
Mm,
Pretty little, right?
yeah.
And we lived in a ground floor apartment in Brooklyn. We were city people, and I just felt like I knew who I was.
Mm,
And then in the course of a week, all of that changed. Things got very scary very quickly here in Brooklyn. Nobody knew where COVID was coming from or exactly how it was passed. We were confined to our home, which 1.5 bedroom ground floor apartment is not where you want to spend 24/7 if you can help it.
yeah.
And we started to see on the news, I remember we saw on the news that in Rhode Island they were checking New York license plates. And we thought, well, is there going to be a moment at which we can't leave? Like, this could be very
Mm,
scary.
yeah.
And so, without even thinking that much about it, we put our baby and our dog in the back of our Subaru, and we drove 18 hours south to Francis's parents' home, my wife's parents' home in
Wow.
Tupelo, Mississippi.
Wow.
And we got there. We thought we would be there a week. Everybody knows how the story ends. We stayed there for months and months. We moved into an upstairs bedroom in the home. And if you had asked me, hey, do you think that when you're in your mid 40s, you are going to live in your wife's parents' upstairs bedroom? Like, probably I wouldn't have said yes, right? Like, that wouldn't
Yeah.
have been how I saw my life going.
Yeah.
And at first I was like super social, right? I got really into like Zoom yoga and Zoom cocktail parties. And I went to this epic Zoom 40th birthday party. And like 2 weeks in, I hated Zoom. I was just over it, right? And I just wanted to be like at home by myself. And I was depressed. And I discovered that kind of consistently, the only people I was talking to every day, apart from my wonderful in-laws with whom we were living, thank God for them, um, I was talking to my parents and my sister and my brother. And we were quarantining in, goodness, 5 different houses in 4 different states.
Mm,
And we would text or talk almost every day. And I
yeah.
thought, well, this is just weird, because if you had asked me if these would be the people that I would turn to for support in a global emergency, I would have been like, no way. So
Yeah.
what the heck happened? And, I'm probably making the story too long here, Angel, but like
No.
it came back to this idea that I felt like there was something about the process of coming out that forced us to reckon with our individual relationships with each other. And in the end,
Mm,
it made us closer.
yeah.
And so ultimately, the book is my attempt to figure out what that thing was, to write about it so that I could figure it out.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you started writing it during COVID then?
I definitely started writing it,
Yeah.
uh, which I wouldn't recommend, actually. It was, things were hard enough during that period. To also, like, put the pressure of selling a book on yourself was a little bit insane. But yes, I did
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
were you in LA for the entire pandemic?
yeah, I was there from 2019 until 2021. So I've lived in New York City now for a year, but for the worst parts of it, I was in LA. Yeah, and my parents live in Connecticut, and my brother was thankfully out in LA with me, so he was family that I got to be around, and we got to like be in a little pod together. But it was very, I mean, it's such a universal experience of like the isolation, the like self-reflection, um, the like what hobbies and arts am I going to turn to this week kind of thing. So, and some good things did come out of it, but
Yeah.
very, very unique and strange time for sure. I actually so just to share a little bit about like my coming out stories and my family as well, and how it's related to your story in your book is, my mom came out as lesbian when I was about 3. So her and my dad had my brother and I. My brother's 2 years older than me, and yeah, and then that was like a whole thing that shaped my life. And we grew up in a really rural area, and it was super isolating, but then found COLAGE at a young age. So I have the like great honor of being able to have been part of this community for my whole life, which did totally save me in so many ways. And a lot of things that like a lot of second gen people my age like talk about is like this feeling, if your parent has come out before you, right, you grew up with LGBTQ parents,
Right.
there's this like weird like internalized oppression around like, oh no, like I'm straight because like gayness is not a disease, like I'm straight, trust me, I'm straight. And it's like you work so hard to prove that to yourself and to the people around you, because especially in rural areas and in conservative areas, like people actually think it's contagious. So it feels like a protection against our families to assert that we are straight too. Like, we're straight. And then when I also went to college, I found out that I wasn't, or I guess accepted that part of myself that I knew forever. Um,
You know,
and,
I so appreciate you saying that, because I do feel like one experience that I remember talking a lot about with other collage kids, right? When I was 19, 20 and getting involved in collage, which is a lot later than when you were getting involved in collage, but it was the same question that seemed to be always put to our families, which is like, are your children queer, right? And the answer to that question was somehow a reflection on whether our parents had done their parenting right. And so I remember collectively feeling so protective of parents that somehow, and even for our parents, I mean, this wasn't true with my parents specifically, but I remember talking with other collagers at the time, um, people's parents being nervous that they would be queer and having a stake in the game and wanting them to be straight because it would be a reflection on their parenting ability.
yeah,
And I remember being trained to do some media for collage, right? And this is back in the days when like it was so low stakes. It was so unusual that you would see somebody in a newspaper or on television who was talking about having had queer parents, that the questions were very baseline, right?
yeah,
And like always one of the questions would be like, are you gay or are you straight?
yeah,
And the media trained answer to that question was like, Angel, I think what you're asking is if I'd grown up to be a healthy, happy, self-realized human being, and the answer is I have, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, totally averting the question, which is
So,
such a dangerous question.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I love that answer. I do love that answer. It really points to the absurdity of the question.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely felt it, and I think a lot of people, yeah, not even just my age. You're right. Like, I mean, in every generation of Queerspawn, it's like you feel this, and um, yeah, and then I actually came out as non-binary to myself and others during the pandemic. Definitely was thinking about it before then, but like it was through that self-reflection, through that alone time, through the like really leaning on close friends in a way that I hadn't before, that I realized that about myself. And I had a really I had a really strange journey coming out to my family being queer and non-binary. And I think that's the other thing that people assume about like being second gen is like, oh, like your parents are gonna react great and accept you and be perfect because they're also queer. And that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
But kind of like what you said, right? It's like because of internalized homophobia, it's like maybe even they are like, oh, but I did parenting well, so maybe my kids will be straight, kind of thing, especially back in like our parents' generation. And yeah, I told my mom I came out as bisexual, and I told my mom I was bi like probably 4 times, like truly told her to her face until she was like, wait, really? Like she just like kept forgetting it. Um, but
Well, even that is funny. Excuse me. because one of the things that I thought a lot about writing this book is when I did the coming out, right? When I came out to my parents, I was pretty judgy about their response to me, and I had a pretty high bar. I expected them to step up and do the right thing and love me through that and say the right thing, right?
Yeah.
And then I think about what the experience of my siblings coming out to me was, and I
Mm.
was horrible to them, right?
Mm.
And this was me who was already thought of myself as a progressive person and thought of myself as like LGBTQ friendly. And I
Yeah.
remember my sister coming out to me as bi, and my response being so diminishing, just being like, you just want to be like me. Like, you just want to be like me and dad. Like, okay, yeah, sure, you're bi. That's cool. Yeah, you can be bi, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, my sister is married to a woman and has adorable little children in Oregon these days, and still identifies as bisexual. And I feel like I will owe her an apology every day of her life for
Mm.
not when she was willing to tell me who she was,
Yeah.
not being willing to hear her. So
Yeah.
then I think I figured out Angel. And then like a year later, my brother comes out to me and he's like, when I come to your graduation next week from graduate school, like, please use the pronouns he, him. I'm going by the name Evan. And my response to him literally is like, Evan, like, is this Oberlin? Is this Oberlin doing? Evan, I
Mm.
saw you were wearing a dress at Christmas and that dress looked great. I mean, if you want to try this, it's fine, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's like it was so diminishing. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's a useful thing to own that in public because it is a truth that the people that we love most are also the people that it is hardest. And like my my dear brother was patient with me through that. He did not need to be. But I took from
Yeah.
that when the people in my life continue to try to tell me who they are and show me who they are, like I should just shut up and listen a little bit better.
Yeah. 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 Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I mean, it's also like that totally gets to society's assumption too about like queer people automatically being super accepting and being able to say the right thing. And it's like, well, we are human and
Yeah.
we will have our own reactions, and it's great that you're acknowledging them and reconciling with that. But yeah, the reality is that it won't necessarily be smoother for people who come out to other queer people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your experience coming out as non-binary like? Especially given that so much of it happened for you internally through the pandemic.
Yeah, it was, it's been such a roller coaster. I feel like it's still a roller coaster to this day. Which, I mean, it's only been a couple of years, but still. Um, I I like came out to my close friends who were also thinking about gender in the same way as me first, and that was really good and felt supportive. And one of my best friends is actually, we met through COLAGE, and they're also second gen, and helped me a lot through this journey. Um, and and then I like waited a bit to come out to my family. I mean, I came out to my brother first because like he's like at my age, and I was like, he'll know what this is, and like he'll be able to change his language around my pronouns quickly, maybe. And he did do pretty well, but coming out to my parents was really, really hard. Yeah, I feel like coming out to my mom was good in a way because we got to have a lot of conversations around gender being a construct and what this means for people today versus what it means for people in her generation. She has, and her partner has told me this herself too. Her partner said that like she would be trans if she was born 30 years later or
Yeah.
something like that. And so it really like, I think those conversations really helped me to like not think about being non-binary as a third gender box, but really think about it as like a rejection of just the gender binary in general, and that like we can't actually assume anyone's gender when we look at them, and even if we know them and they say like, yes, I am a cis woman or I am a cis man, like you have no idea what's going on in that person's head and through that process. And it has actually opened me up to so many other relationships and friendships and being able to like really see people, I think, for where they are that day, you know, because it changes. It's really fluid. So that conversation process with my mom was helpful, even though like the acceptance part was a little bit tricky for her. And my dad, who's a straight man, he tried. You know, that's all I can say. He tried.
Well, I think too about, so I have two good friends who came out around gender during the pandemic, and I've spoken with each of them about the way that the pandemic, that the internal lengthy process of being alone with oneself and not responsible for showing up visually in public for a very long time was a super useful opportunity to reflect more deeply on like who you felt you really were. I was just kind of wondering if that resonated for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think with the initial like my initial coming out as non-binary, I like really knew it before the pandemic started. Um, but like I knew it in a different way. Like I knew it in the way that it was like, okay, like I definitely do not do not identify in this binary. That's for sure. But then again, like I said, like for me, I feel like talking to a lot of people, having close contact with people, you know, like using social media, it had become this like almost righteous identity in itself. And the pandemic and having that time of self-reflection and isolation and just time
Yeah.
really did like make me realize that like for me, I really don't want to, I don't view it as this third gender box to check. And I think a lot of people would agree with that, but it's still it can easily come off that way because it's like when you're part of an oppressed group, you just want to make space for yourself. And
Yeah.
you just want to, if you feel safe enough, assert your identity. And so then it can like come into this weird gray area of being like, well, like what does it mean to be non-binary? What are the requirements? What do you have to look like? What do you have to dress like? And it's like all of that's kind of crap. Like it, you know, like it's just whatever you want it to be. And so I feel like I've become like more flexible in my own definition of what it means for me, what it means day to day, and also just like through self-reflection more I guess just easeful around like pronouns and you know misgendering that happens every single day, and it's a way easier existence this way.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. I'm also glad to hear that collage made such a difference for you. I mean, I remember viscerally learning about collage when I was already in my early 20s and living in San Francisco and felt very alone as someone whose parent had come out. I didn't know other people whose parents had come out really. I didn't feel a sense of connection to that experience.
Yeah.
And you, I was part of a family that also had experienced divorce, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, often but not always, families with queer parents are families that in which the children originated in straight marriages, which means that like divorce is also a part of that experience. And it was hard for me to decouple those identities. And at first I thought they had to be different. Like there was the child of divorce me, and then there was the child of queers me. And the child of queers me was like super happy me. I got to be in the pride parades and I had the like rainbow flag and I loved that part. But then the child of divorce me was like sad me. And collage was really helpful to me in allowing those identities to fuse, just like meeting lots of other people who came from families that looked and felt like mine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so funny because as you were saying that, my first best friend from collage just joined this IG live, and that is exactly how we met. Was we were in like eighth grade, I think, and I had been in collage from all of elementary and middle school, you know, as soon as I could, age of 7 or 8, and a lot of the kids I met and were friends with were born through their family was created through adoption or donor conception, and and it was great because, you know, their family looked like mine, but their story was very different. And one of my friends who I was, you know, had been friends with my whole life came up to me after a workshop one day at Family Week and was like, Angel, I found someone who also has divorced parents whose mom came out as queer. You need to meet her. And I was like, okay. And then Brooke and I were introduced, and we instantly became very close. And I feel like that shared experience just was like the foundation of being able to like really like maybe even be the first people to like really see each other for who we were outside of these like identities in our story, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yay, Brooke.
Yeah.
Wow.
I want to ask you a couple questions just about like your writing and being a writer, a Queerspawn writer, and we are going to try to have like an ongoing writer circle through COLAGE that happens through 2023 with published authors who come in. And so if anyone here is a writer, you are definitely welcome to that once you get the details hammered out. But Jessi, I would love to know like what was your process like? What was hard about it? Yeah, what did you learn through the process of writing this memoir?
I love that you are doing that for writers. I love that there are so many Queerspawn writers, and there are a lot of them, and filmmakers and creative people in general. I think about Mima Spadola, who made one of the first documentaries about families like ours called Our House. I think about Alicia, who actually blurbed my book, whose wonderful memoir, Fairyland, is being made into a movie right now. And those are great in published work, but then there's also so much great as of yet unpublished work, because writing is such a precious place to learn about ourselves, right? And that ultimately is what writing was for me. Like, and the reason why a memoir is not because I wanted some massive audience for my work, but because I wanted to understand my family better, and writing was my tool to do that. It was my path to understand my family more deeply and therefore myself more deeply, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and I also just want to say that, like, it looks like Julie, who I don't know, says storytelling is activism. Yes, right? Yes, because whenever you find a way to tell your story, to share your perspective on the world, you show up. You raise your hand to be counted, and that's so important right now. And I think I'm particularly aware of it because, you know, the world weirdly spun forward so much in my adulthood, but then also backward too. And
Hmm.
so, you know, my first children were born in 2018. My wife gave birth to twins. And at that point, we had gotten legally married. And I was going to be on their birth certificate, right? And I was on their birth certificate. And so, great. I'm legally their parent. And because marriage at the federal level protects my relationship with their mother, like I can expect to be their parent anywhere I go. But now we live in an environment, even 4 years later, right? Like my surviving son just turned 4 years old. And we live in an environment where that birth certificate protects me in the state of New York, but it's a state document. And if marriage falls at the federal level, and it very well might, even though I'm super optimistic about the news just today about the bill in the Senate, like it's up for debate what happens with gay marriage at the federal level. And then when we go to our second home in Mississippi, we also spend just a ton of time in Mississippi. Like, I wouldn't legally be considered my children's parent.
Yeah.
So, telling this story about our family, which is both uniquely a story about a queer family, but broadly just a story about a whole lot of people who live under one roof and try to get along with each other, which is a very relatable story. Like, it is my hope that it expands the notion of what family can be to people who otherwise wouldn't think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really powerful. Yeah, I think like Queer Spawn are natural writers, and we should be because our stories should be heard. And it's so touching and like and just like inspiring to see stories like yours, and all the other writers who are on this call, and the ones you mentioned, sharing their stories out into the wide world, because you're right, like our rights are not secured, and unfortunately it does feel like we're moving backwards in a lot of ways. And yeah, I just think that storytelling as activism is such a true statement, and there's nothing more powerful than like really being able to like empathize with someone else and their upbringing, their background. Yeah.
Yeah. Same. Are you a writer at all? I know I asked you that before.
Like, I don't consider myself a writer, but um, I took a creative nonfiction class in college, and I loved it so much, and I enjoy writing a lot. But you know, who knows? Yeah. Um, so I'll ask you one more question, and then we can kind of wrap up. But I was just wondering, like, what were your favorite parts to write about in this book, or any, you know, writing that you do? Like, what feels the most like soul filling for you?
Um, well, that's a great question. I mean, I can say that like, you know, writers are different in their relationship to their work. And there are some book authors who enjoy the process of publishing, but complain that the process of writing is very hard.
Mm,
For whatever reason, like maybe I was born this way, it's the opposite for me. I really loved the writing part of this book. I woke up every day for 15 months and wrote before my kids woke up, so between 5 and 7 a.m. And I loved it. It was like my own time. The only, you know, if you are a parent of young children or have been a parent of young children, this will really resonate for you. Like, you don't own your time and you don't own your body. It all belongs to small, needy, awesome humans. But I would have these 2 hours of every day that were just uniquely mine and that my really helped me protect. And I loved that.
yeah.
That's the part I loved. And then this other part, which is where like it publishes in the world and it goes out into the world, it's much more alienating, right? The very best parts of it, Angel, are these parts, are like the parts where I get to talk with people with whom it's a privilege to be in community and with whom I have shared experience. I mean, like,
Yeah.
you know, and who, like, I talk to you and I'm like, oh, you get it. Like, there's something fundamental that you get that I don't have to explain.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other side of that is like having to go on social media a whole lot and like post happy photos of me smiling because I'm trying to sell my book. I hate that. Like, that is like, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, we are so grateful that you're here to share your story with us. And yeah, and I really do love like just seeing Queerspawn stories out in the world and being able to talk about it. It is one of the most powerful things I think you can experience as a collager. And yeah, this was really great. And I would love for you to promote your book and your website and where people can buy it, because everyone should read it.
Well, I'm not always that great at that, but yeah, well, follow me on Instagram because you know, my profile has like 1,700 different ways that you could find my book. You know, it's a great privilege to me if you bought it and read it, or checked it out from your library and read it, honestly, or listened to it on audio. I read the audiobook, which is a really surreal experience to basically close yourself in a very small sound booth and read out loud your work for 3 days. But I did that.
Wow.
And and yeah, and like I also just want to say, like, collage has like so many incredible alumni who are like creating creative work, and maybe if you're watching, maybe you are one of them, and like anytime you allow that work out into the world, it is like a great gift, and it is a gift to my children who will be looking as they grow for images of themselves out in the world. And it is a privilege, so thank you.
Wow, awesome, Jessi. Thank you so much for your time. This was so great.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.